That is the quote from Brandon Hyde when asked about Ryan Mountcastle. I'll just read a snippet of it. When asked about Mountcastle's potential return, Mountie hasn't played since August 22nd, Brandon Hyde said, quote, "I want to say it's optimistic, but I'm not really sure. I think he's going to come back by the end of the regular season. I just don't know when." That's not great, especially considering when we started talking about this Ryan Mountcastle injury. I remember you had noted like, oh yeah, there's a stretch here where the Orioles are facing a bunch of right-handed pitching. Maybe he wouldn't have been in the lineup a ton anyway. So hopefully he's just out, a week or so and you're able to get him back. You can get him back in the lineup and he'll be more than good to go for September. We didn't think he was going to miss a ton of time because Mountcastle did not hit the injured list right away. And, we thought this would be a pretty short stint. But now, even the returning in the regular season is now in question, which is not great because we assumed that this would be a shorter-term thing, and now all of a sudden you're hoping that Ryan Mountcastle is going to be back at some point in late September to be ready for a playoff push, lumping him in with a lot of these injuries that we didn't think he would be lumped in with.
Yeah, totally. And it was one of those that you kind of thought, okay, slid into base, jammed his wrist. Okay, it'll take maybe 10 days, maybe a little bit longer. We'll get him back soon. And that's not what it was like. Like you said, Brandon Hyde was not very optimistic about it for getting him back in the regular season. And I think that does hurt, especially when you thought it was going to be one that you got back way sooner than some of these other guys that are starting to come back. And you're lucky to have Ryan O'Hearn to fill that first base void, but there's also been lots of moving pieces for where does Kobe Mayo fit in. We saw him at third base, saw him at first base, so definitely Brandon Hyde is trying the best he can to move those pieces around the infield when you've lost so many players in the infield in Jorge Mateo, Jordan Westberg, Ryan Mountcastle, Ramon Arias. That's core four players that you're losing in the infield, so there's been lots of moving pieces, and this is one that you would have hoped earlier on to get back, and Ryan O'Hearn could be more of a designated hitter in September. Instead, he's been filling that void at first base.
Yeah, it leaves you in a really tough spot against left-handed pitching as well, because you were already without Jordan Westberg for much of the second half of the season. Jorge Mateo, of course, out for the year. Ramon Arias has been out for a recent stretch as well. So you're just taking away another good right-handed option in Ryan Mountcastle. I think it's pretty fair to say that, excluding the switch hitters in Adley Rutschman and Anthony Santander, Ryan Mountcastle and Jordan Westberg were the two best right-handed hitters that you had in this lineup. You could probably make a case that Ramon Arias was third and Jorge Mateo was fourth, right? These are the most important right-handed hitters that you had available to you. And yes, Emmanuel Rivera has played well in spurts. You've been able to get him in good spots at third base and first base. Kobe Mayo is trying to find it a little bit, but it's nice to see him get some opportunities, even if it is, at the expense of guys on the injured list. Obviously, you're still happy to see Mayo get some reps. But looking at the playoffs, I mean, you don't really want to have to rely. I know this is nothing against guys like Emmanuel Rivera, but the plan was certainly not to rely on him come late September, October. You're hoping that you have your A lineup against left-handed pitching with guys like Jordan Westberg and Ryan Mountcastle back. So hopefully we still see him by the end of the regular season. But Brandon Hyde's quotes and general vibes around it does not sound incredibly optimistic. But the good news on the injury front is that's really the only bad news that we have. Jordan Westberg was fielding grounders yesterday, making throws across the diamond. He is going to start a hitting program soon. We don't know exactly what that means, but presumably a hitting program will lead to a rehab assignment, which will lead to hopefully Westberg being back sometime in the end of September, which will hopefully lead to a healthy Jordan Westberg in the playoffs, which is really best case scenario.
Yeah, and Jordan Westberg is one of those guys that we've talked week in, week out as one of the most hurtful of the injured list players. And this is someone, especially as of late, where the Orioles offense has been kind of slow in spurts here and there, and someone who was really impactful with runners in scoring position. And he is one of those players that would be making a difference right now. And you can only hope that he'll do that later in September, and especially the playoffs as well. But he also kind of said he's not putting a timeline on it. Brandon Hyde said that he definitely is putting a timeline on it. So it's a little bit of, and luckily for Jordan Westburg, I mean, he's taking it maturely. He's not putting pressure on it. He knows that health and safety comes first. He's not going to throw himself into a situation where he's subpar and then that hurts the rest of the team. Right. So I think that it's also important to realize that the grip strength of a bat is a lot harder than the grip strength of a ball. So even though he's getting some grounders here and there and throwing it from third to first, the real hit, getting into the cage, is going to be the important part. Yeah, so we will see when Jordan Westburg starts that hitting program. Either way, it's encouraging because the timeline hopefully looks solid for a late September, early October return. In the bullpen, Jacob Webb and Danny Coulombe, both on rehab assignments. Woo! That's big. Jacob Webb will probably be the first one back of those two. He has made a few outings in his rehab assignment already. Danny Coulombe just starting up today, I believe, will be his rehab assignment. So exciting because those are two high leverage guys, Danny Coulombe especially, and this Orioles bullpen is going to need them down the stretch, and hopefully their arms are fresh too. I mean, obviously you don't want anybody to go down with injury, but I guess, if you're looking at it from a glass half full type of perspective, Jacob Webb and Danny Coulombe should be very fresh at a time when a lot of bullpen arms around baseball are going to be really hurting for days off. So they've had more days off than you would like, but it's days off nonetheless. And it's great to hear that even Danny Coulombe said himself that his elbow feels great. So it's also very reinforcing to hear from the player himself that it actually feels great. And again, not just kind of, okay, I'm coming back and there's still a little lingering pain. So definitely would be awesome to have a lefty back in the bullpen. Jacob Webb tossed scoreless inning in his third rehab game with Norfolk last night. Maybe could meet it in the O's in Detroit. I don't know. We'll see. In the starting rotation, Grayson Rodriguez has been throwing in the bullpen, getting closer to live batting practice, which would be another step closer to his own rehab assignment. Grayson, I don't know how long the rehab assignment would be because you're trying to get him up in the big leagues as quickly as possible, obviously, but another encouraging note that he's throwing in the bullpen. We've seen him, doing long toss in the field, things like that. So hopefully, again, I know it's the same thing we're saying for all these guys, but hopefully it's a late September return and he could be in the starting rotation come October. Yeah, and all these changes come middle of September. Middle of September now, but so late September would be huge, and there's no kind of other way to say it other than the ways we have been over the last few weeks. But it is going to be kind of a rebuild that the Orioles would need, especially after the struggles that they've had, not only in the first half of the season with Kyle Bradish going down, but also obviously the second half with Grayson Rodriguez and everything else. So it's coming into fruition hopefully soon. Yeah, hopefully soon. And then finally, a positive Ramon reminder. All right, Ramon reminder. Brandon Hyde said that Ramon Arias is progressing, quote, ahead of schedule with a sprained ankle. Kind of similar to Ryan Mountcastle when it's a sprain of like a wrist or an ankle. It's kind of hard to tell how long that injury is going to last, as seen by the fact that we didn't think that Ryan Mountcastle sprained wrist would last as long as it has. Ramon Arias with the sprained ankle is apparently progressing quicker than expected. So a sprained ankle is one of those things. It could have been 6 to 8 weeks. It could have been 3 to 4. Could have been 2. So Ramon Arias ahead of schedule. It's great news because as we mentioned, when he went down, he was absolutely bawling in August. So even if we get to late September, early October, and Jordan Westburg comes back and is your primary third baseman, I think we could see Ramon Arias in a platoon situation with Jackson Holliday at second base. If there's a left-handed pitcher on the mound, he could start at second base as a right-handed hitter. He is a quality defensive replacement at third or second, wherever you need him. He's just a solid rotational guy in the lineup as well. If you need a pinch hitter,
as a right-handed bat, Ramon Urias could be the name that you call on there. So again, hopefully he is ready for the playoffs, and he would be a really nice piece to get back.
Yeah, this is definitely something to be excited about, especially because he was one of those guys that completely flew under the radar in the first half and even right after the All-Star break. But then after the August that you mentioned that he was having, I mean, even just the 15 games before getting injured, he was batting .341 with an OPS just over 1,100. So just to get him back, have that reinforcement on offense would be huge, especially with kind of Adley Rutschman having his slow spurts here and there. Gunnar Henderson is doing phenomenally right now. Cedric Mullins playing really well as well. But to kind of get a fourth guy that would be you would really trust at the plate in moments late in September, and especially moving into the playoffs, would be huge. And I think something with Ramon Urias is before he got injured, he was leading the charge offensively for this Orioles offense. And he was kind of trying to lead the pack a little bit. So to get him back at a time when Ced is doing well, Gunner's doing well, hopefully Adley is coming out of that slump. We saw two really good games out of him so far against the Red Sox. So to kind of have it all collectively as an offense is something that they need, because I think they've been struggling to do well all together as a unit. Whereas Ramon was kind of leading the pack right before he got injured.
Yeah, we heard Ryan O'Hearn talk about it, that Ramon Urias, was kind of carrying the offense for a stretch, and he was. And as you mentioned right now, Cedric Mullins is kind of doing that in September. Cedric Mullins and Gunnar Henderson, who have had, a fantastic 2 weeks here, which is part of why we kind of wanted to talk about the minor league season today, because it's really the same story up at the big leagues right now. Like Brandon Hyde knows it, the clubhouse knows it. The offense needs to play better. We saw a solid outing from the offense yesterday. You mentioned Adley Rutschman had a good game. He has looked good over his last two. Had some extra base hits 2 days ago. Came up in a huge spot yesterday, so hopefully Adley Rutschman is starting to turn things around. Gunnar Henderson has been awesome. Cedric Mullins has been awesome. But just all in all, the offense needs to play better. And that's kind of been the story over the last few weeks, and there's not really many new developments there. So it's kind of a good time to check in with the minor league season, because Delmarva and Aberdeen both wrapped up their seasons on Sunday. Bowie has one more series this week, and they will wrap up their season on Sunday. Norfolk has two more series. They will wrap up their season next Sunday. And I know with the success at the big league level, we haven't been talking a ton about the Orioles farm system, because this is just kind of a different era of the Orioles farm. For a while at the beginning of the Mike Elias era, the farm system was the focus, because that was where the talent was. It obviously wasn't up in the big leagues yet. They were having some tough seasons in the majors, but with names like Gunnar Henderson and Grayson Rodriguez and Adley Rutschman down in the minor leagues, you had a lot of hope that the big league club would turn things around eventually, and that's exactly what happened. But in conversations in the offseason leading up to the draft with guys like Matt Blood, the thought around the farm system was that it is a vessel to make the big league team better in different ways than it was before. Before, it was you had high draft picks, you had to hit on those high draft picks, you had to develop those guys because they were going to be the cornerstones of the franchise. And now, like we saw at the trade deadline, moving guys like Connor Norby and Seth Johnson, the farm system has become, you still want to develop top talent, because those guys are still going to be contributors at the big league level if you hold on to them. They're not necessarily going to be the franchise cornerstones, but, even if you're drafting in the 20s, those are still guys that you're hoping are going to be big league contributors down the line. But it can be a vessel for big league success through trades as well, and that's what we've seen. Moving on from guys like Joey Ortiz in the offseason for Corbin Burns. Again, Norby and Johnson were moved for pieces at the deadline that you thought would improve the team. So it's a very different farm system than we're accustomed to seeing. It's not ranked as the top farm system in baseball anymore, and it's a very different top 30 right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you look at it and it feels very different, because it is. I mean, you should be happy that you've seen Jackson Holliday, Kobe Mayo, bumped up to the majors, and Heston Kjerstad and Colton Cowser becoming an everyday player, and those guys who are becoming big league contributors. But it does kind of make you feel a little, okay, now the farm system that the Orioles were once known for not long ago looks very different, and there might be some doubts around it. Like you said, not the top farm system in the big leagues anymore. But I'm glad you mentioned talking to Matt Blood, because he did say that with you, having a better big league team is the priority. It's not that we're trying to build up this farm system so that it is the number one in all of baseball, but it is to make the big league team better. So I think that is kind of the note to take away, that you are losing Jackson Holliday and Kobe Mayo becomes the number one prospect in the organization. But how long is that going to last? And you're seeing players who were brought in at the draft this year become those new number 3 top 10 guys. So it looks very different, but it's part of the process.
Yeah, last year was an incredibly rare crossover where the Orioles were a 100-win team and also had the best farm system in baseball.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to continue to happen. And as you mentioned, in that conversation with Matt Blood, I went, hey, how do you maintain that level of excellence down on the farm while trying to, keep the big league team competitive? And not that the farm system isn't a priority, but Matt Blood was basically like, well, we're not going to.
Yeah.
Because that's not what the farm system is meant for right now. The farm system is a vessel to make the big league club better. And as I mentioned before, it was you keep the guys there, you develop them, they become your franchise cornerstones. And now it's, okay, if we need to move off from some guys to go acquire players that we think are going to make the big league club better right now, we're going to do that.
Like Zach Eflin.
Exactly. So it's not as loaded of a farm system as it was before. It's still ranked as a top 5 farm system in baseball, so it's certainly nothing to shake your head at right now. But it's not the same. When you look at the top 10, there's no Jackson Holliday, no Heston Kjerstad, no Colton Cowser, no Cade Povich in the top 10. Yeah. Those guys were in the Orioles' top 30 rankings according to MLB Pipeline at the beginning of the season. They have since graduated with big league reps. Kobe Mayo is the top prospect right now. He is going to graduate at some point. Don't know if it'll be this season. It might be early next season, but he is going to graduate at some point. Then you still have Samuel Basallo, who is the second-ranked prospect in the Orioles' top 30, just one spot below Kobe Mayo in MLB Pipeline's top 100. They are both top 10 prospects in all of baseball. But you don't have the guys anymore like Heston Kjerstad and Colton Cowser, even Jordan Westburg, looking back to last year, that were somewhere in the mid-30s, 40s in the top 100. Now you look at the number 3 prospect in the Orioles system, it's Vance Honeycutt. Number 4 is Enrique Bradfield Jr., 2 guys who I think could be top 100 prospects down the line, but they're not right now. So the Orioles just have 2 top 100 prospects, which for a lot of teams in baseball, you're still raving at the fact that you have 2 top 10 prospects. That's still amazing.
Yeah.
But for the Orioles, it's like, oh man, we don't have 7 prospects in the top 100. That's weird.
Yeah. It feels really different for sure, but it also is kind of nice to know that this big league team still has so much young talent.
Yeah.
Because of that they have graduated and moved into the big leagues, and you would like to see that they are contributing, which they are. And the Orioles have been known for, in the Michael Elias era, to be a young team, and that is still something to really be proud of. When you see all these guys like Jackson Holliday still getting everyday reps, almost everyday reps, and then obviously Colton Cowser, who's on par right now for AL Rookie of the Year. So and that's 2 years in a row still, with Gunnar Henderson last year, and then hopefully Colton Cowser this year for AL Rookie of the Year. That's still a huge testament to this farm system.
Yeah, and it's not the same top 10 that you're accustomed to seeing. You can go back to 2023 and rounding out the top 10 in the system, you had Joey Ortiz at 8, Connor Norby at 9, Kobe Mayo at 10, Beavers at 11, Samuel Basallo at 12. Like, it's not that same kind of depth towards the top. You've got Vance Honeycutt and Enrique Bradfield Jr. at 3 and 4. Chase McDermott is your top pitching prospect, ranked at number 5 in the Orioles' top 30. Dylan Beavers up to number 6. The newly drafted Griff O'Farrell at number 7. And then at 8 and 9, you've got 2 Aberdeen pitchers in Juan Nunez and Luis De Leon. And then at number 10, it's Steven Martinez, who is an international prospect. And again, 7, 8, 9, like 7, 8, 9, 10 doesn't look the same as it did last year, but that's good because the guys that were around that range a year ago have graduated and become solid big leaguers, but it's still been a solid season for the Orioles farm overall, even if it's not, as impressive as it was the past few years where they were far and away the best farm system in baseball. So just want to run through some of the seasons that we've seen from, some of the big names that you should be paying attention to moving forward. The recent draft class, there's not much evaluation that's going to happen in the few weeks that they're playing games from the time that they get drafted to, the end of the season here.
Small sample size.
But there are 4 guys from the most recent draft class that are in the Orioles top 30. Vance Honeycutt at number 3, Griff O'Farrell at number 7, Ethan Anderson at number 13, and Austin Overn at number 17. We just went last weekend and talked to some of those guys in Aberdeen. Vance Honeycutt, the Orioles' third-ranked prospect, he struggled at the plate a little bit. It's a big jump to professional baseball. We knew that the book on Honeycutt was going to be getting on base, cutting the strikeout numbers down. We haven't seen that thus far from him. It's a few weeks. I'm not worried about Vance Honeycutt's strikeout rate through the first few weeks of the season. Griff O'Farrell has kind of been as advertised. He's getting on base a ton. Ethan Anderson has been awesome. Austin Overn has been awesome. Not going to take a ton from those numbers, but it's encouraging that they are all at Aberdeen at this point.
Yeah, totally. And we spoke with Griff O'Farrell, Austin Overn, Vance Honeycutt recently, and kind of talking to them, getting to know them as people is really fun. But O'Farrell, he kind of knows that these pitchers are different, especially from college ball. And Griff O'Farrell was the hardest player in the ACC to strike out this past season. I think he only struck out like once every 12 at-bats, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And only like 24 total in the whole
Griff O'Farrell's final season stats at Virginia were insane. He played 63 games, 323 plate appearances, 284 at-bats. He struck out 24 times. That's absurd.
Yeah. So he was saying, when I asked him what the kind of biggest adjustment was from college pitchers to pro pitchers, he's like I kind of have to bite my pride a little bit because he took a lot of pride in college, being the toughest player in the conference, in the entire ACC to strike out. And then all of a sudden he's coming to pro pitchers and he knows that it's not going to be the same way. So it is a huge jump from college ball to pro ball, and they're all adjusting. And like you said, it's still a small sample size, so not taking much from that. But also Austin Overn, who's extremely fast. And you kind of mentioned that he's similar to an Enrique Bradfield Jr. in terms of that, where not necessarily the biggest slugger, but you're looking forward to having his speed on the field. And he even marked number 361 for stolen bases for Aberdeen, which is the single-season record in all of the minor leagues. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
Good for him.
I think the general takeaway from the most recent draft class is that it's exciting to see those guys together in Aberdeen. We have seen that be a benefit for past Orioles draft classes where guys will get drafted together, they move up together, they start winning together at the minor league level, and then it translates to good things at the big league level. Like, those guys form relationships in the minor leagues, and those relationships are important when they get to upper levels. If it's a Norfolk clubhouse, if it's a Baltimore clubhouse eventually one day, forming those relationships is important. Griff O'Farrell and Ethan Anderson already have a pretty strong bond, considering they were roommates for 3 years at Virginia and are now going on year 4 as roommates living together in Aberdeen. So exciting to see all of those guys together. 2023 draft class is interesting. It's highlighted by Enrique Bradfield Jr., but the Orioles traded away the second and third round picks from that draft class in Mac Horvath and Jackson Baumeister. So it's a bit of a tougher draft class to evaluate because you have Enrique Bradfield Jr., who's the Orioles' 4th-ranked prospect. He had an awesome season. I know Bradfield's offensive numbers aren't going to absolutely leap off the page, but they were never going to. He got the call up to Double-A Bowie. The batting average and on-base percentage have been good. He's stolen 70-plus bases thus far. If he can keep the OPS right around 750 where it is right now, this is going to be a really, really good player because he is elite in center field defensively. He is elite on the base paths. If he can get on base, like a single is a double for Enrique Bradfield Jr., And it is as good as Cedric Mullins is in center field. Enrique Bradfield Jr. is more than likely going to be even a step up from that in center field defensively at the big league level. Think of like a Michael Harris type of defender there. So if he can keep the OPS right around 750, that's going to be a really good big league player.
And it's also kind of cool to think about because the Orioles, it's not like they're taking a specific mold. Sure, they have their lefty college hitters that they like to draft, but you have Enrique Bradfield Jr., who is extremely fast, not your typical slugger, but barely strikes out, very similar to Griffo Farrell, who was drafted this season, but then completely different from a Vance Honeycutt, where he does have some issues with swing and miss and striking out. So three completely different calibers of players, but they both will end up succeeding. I mean, we saw Jordan Westberg at the same level as Vance Honeycutt had some issues in college with swing and miss rate, but then they developed him into one of the most impactful big league players this season.
Yeah.
And you're going to get the same thing with Enrique Bradfield Jr., Griffo Farrell for different reasons. And when we were leading up to the draft, I mean, another thing that Matt Blood said is it's not like we're drafting him for one reason and then we're going to try and shift that and make him into a different type of player. We'll stick with what he's good at and make sure it's all the way throughout the system and development. So it is kind of nice to know that the Orioles are drafting players for what their specialties are, and they're not going to change them for it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. While Honeycutt and Bradfield do have a similar elite defensive profile in center field, they are very different hitters. 22 games for Enrique Bradfield Jr. thus far in Double-A Bowie. He's hitting .282, a .384 on base percentage. OPS is close to 800. He's got 12 walks and 12 strikeouts. That's really, really impressive out of Bradfield. I know I mentioned that the Orioles only have 2 top 100 prospects. I think Enrique Bradfield Jr. should be there. I would imagine he's going to start next year at Double-A Bowie as well. If everything goes well, we could see him at Norfolk by maybe sometime mid-season next year, and wouldn't rule out a late September, early October call-up for Bradfield just because the defensive profile and the speed are so good, and that's something that would be really valuable in a playoff stretch. So really impressed with what I've seen from Bradfield thus far this season, especially with the offensive numbers in Bowie. The rest of the draft class there, you kind of have some hidden gems. Tavian Josenberger was a higher round draft pick. I think he was a 3rd round pick in the 2023 class. He's not ranked in the Orioles top 30, but he's hitting .300 in Bowie. He plays solid defense at second base and a corner outfield as well. And then how about Michael Forett, the Orioles 18th ranked prospect, pitching prospect. He's one of the better arms in the system, a 14th round pick in 2023, but he's been a huge strikeout guy in Aberdeen. Michael Forett is somebody to keep an eye on. He has been a really nice surprise as a 14th round pick. As with a lot of Orioles pitching prospects, he's got to keep the walk numbers down a little bit, but the stuff is really, really good.
Yeah, and it's also kind of the way that the Orioles have succeeded so far is not necessarily just drafting an Adley Rutschman at the top overall pick, but like you said, getting them later in the draft. And that's another reason the Orioles would never have gotten Zach Eflin this season if it weren't for that kind of depth in draft success. And another thing is that the Orioles also wouldn't have kind of survived and stayed afloat the way they are right now in the big leagues with all the injuries that they've had if it weren't for the strength in the farm system and the kind of the depth that they've had to bring in regardless of where they were drafted. So that's also interesting to talk about. But I think Tavian Josenberger was one of those kind of sneaky guys where you didn't really expect him. He wasn't known as much as Enrique Bradfield for his speed, but Tavian is right up there with him for speed and stealing bases. He's on the 60-day injured list right now, but and only saw 7 games in Bowie before that. But I think he had the first 3 stolen base game in Bowie all season for a player. So definitely, I agree. I think you will see some of these players, especially in Enrique, who will jump up the prospect list next season when they start to make a name for themselves.
Yeah, nice to see Enrique and Tavian Josenberger already up in Double-A Bowie as well from that 2023 class. The 2022 draft class is an interesting one. Of course, at the top, you've got Jackson Holliday, who has now graduated from prospect rankings. He's in the major leagues. He's one of the best prospects in baseball. That rocks. You've got Dylan Beavers, who is the 6th-ranked prospect in the Orioles top 30. He spent the entire season in Bowie this year, which you can look at a few different ways. You know, a fellow draft classmate and Judd Fabian that we'll get to here in a minute did get the call up to AAA Norfolk. You would have liked to see that from Dylan Beavers as well. But the book on Beavers was always that there was going to be things that he needed to work on if he was going to progress further. OPS is right around 750 for the season in AA Bowie, hitting 240, on base percentage around 340, 15 homers, close to 40 extra base hits. It's a solid season at AA for a second-round pick. I think you would have liked to see him maybe get promoted to AAA Norfolk at some point, but as we have talked about with Beavers for years now, since he was drafted, it's a funky swing. The mechanics were always going to get tweaked with, and I think Beavers has just had to kind of find his footing with those mechanical changes, where you want to make the changes that are necessary to feel like you're in a good spot moving forward, but you also don't want to change so much that you don't feel like yourself at the plate. So in conversations with Dylan, it's clear that he's trying to find that balance between, you know, of course he's listening to coaches. He's trying to take as much feedback as he can, but he also knows himself and he knows what works at the plate. So I think for Beavers, it's really that balancing act of figuring out, okay, how many things am I going to tweak versus am I just going to go up and have the swing that I've always had?
Yeah, and it's going to be hard for Beavers next season, especially because of all the fantastic outfielders that Bowie recently got promoted to Bowie.
Yeah.
In Enrique and Tavian Josenberger, Reed Trimble. It's definitely a very fast outfield, and Beavers is right up there with them, and he's kind of the veteran in that group with some other guys as well in the outfield. But he's going to have to work next season to kind of compete. And we were talking with Roberto Mercado, the manager of the Bay Sox, and he was saying how it really does push the players to compete because they all want to have that competitive nature, and you're all supporting each other, but of course you're trying to get promoted before the others. So I think this competition is going to be great for Beavers moving forward next season. He's still extremely valued in that clubhouse for leadership, both in the outfield and just in general. So I think that with all this competition, it could either make or break him. But I think probably it'll push him even harder.
Yeah, and the competition is still there. I know we've talked about it in the past. Like, this feels like ages ago now, but I remember having the same conversation in AA Bowie when it was Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westberg, and Joey Ortiz at that level, because they were all competing for reps at shortstop. At, you know, certain points you would have Westberg playing second, Ortiz playing short, Gunnar playing third. Like, that helps. It helps to have that level of competition there. And as you mentioned, of course, they're all happy for each other. There was probably no one more excited for Judd Fabian to get the call to AAA Norfolk than Dylan Beavers, but that competition is still there, and it's still going to be present with, as you mentioned, guys like Enrique Bradfield Jr. getting the call up to Bowie. Like, that's a lot of good outfielders at that level, and Dylan Beavers is going to have to work to separate himself. Judd Fabian did separate himself a little bit at AA Bowie this year. He's the Orioles' 11th ranked prospect. Got the call up to AAA Norfolk. He has struggled there thus far, but it's a huge jump from AA to AAA. 18 homers for the Bay Sox. I think the general takeaway for Fabian is just that it's good to see him get promoted. The bat is always going to provide power for Judd Fabian. He's got the Juddy Jacks nickname for a reason. It's solid defense in center field. There are other center fielders in this system like Bradfield and Honeycutt that are, I think, a step above him defensively in center, but Fabian is no slouch at that position either. He is a really, really solid defender in center field. So next season, it'll be good to see him at AAA Norfolk, hopefully get his footing a little bit, and I think Fabian could work his way into the conversation, not necessarily as someone that, you know, where's Judd Fabian? He needs to get promoted to the big leagues, so we need to have this guy in the lineup every day, but at least a solid rotational option, I think, at the big leagues at some point next year if he performs well in Norfolk.
Yeah, and Fabian's another one of those guys that was completely different at the plate compared to an Enrique, because Fabian does have some swing and miss rates, and he worked really hard to get that down this season. But then you're kind of seeing that even harder push from AA to AAA, where he's batting 184 in AAA, but and where he was 233 at Bowie. But even despite that, despite his swing and miss problems this season, he still led Bowie in home runs and RBIs this season. So he is that kind of power guy, like you mentioned, that an Enrique won't be in the future, or might not be in the future. So, and same with stealing bases. Last season he had a lot of confidence, 31 stolen bases, but then this season only 16. And I discussed that with him earlier in the season, and he said it's just about getting the confidence back.
Yeah.
Especially when you are moving up from high A to double A to triple A. So it'll just be about comfortability and settling down in Norfolk.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we'll see Fabian get off to a strong start at that level next year. The other guy who gets lumped into, kind of the trio with Beavers and Judd Fabian is Max Wagner, who is the Orioles' second-round pick in 2022. You hate to just toss out a season, but he played 25 games. Max Wagner was dealing with a lot of different injuries this season and just wasn't able to stay on the field. We saw him in Aberdeen. We saw him in Bowie. He was just trying to get right and never really did. So it's unfortunately kind of a lost season for Max Wagner in his age 22 season. Again, I mean, he was in the FCL. He played 5 games in Aberdeen, 19 games in Bowie. Like, if you're playing 19 games on and off injury, yeah, the numbers aren't going to be great because you're trying to figure things out, right? He dominated in the 5 games he was in Aberdeen, but it's just hard to find any sort of rhythm when you only played 25 minor league games. So Max Wagner down at number 23 in the Orioles' top 30. You're certainly not tossing out the potential that Wagner has. It's still a versatile defender who can play third base and second base. The bat is great. We saw it in his final year at Clemson. So you hope to see him just stay healthy next season. Would imagine he starts the year in Double-A Bowie once again, but you just want to see him on the field because you want to see what Max Wagner can truly do.
Yeah, especially to be able to make that name for himself, both in the farm system with just the Orioles, but in the minors as a whole. So definitely hope for him to stay healthy so that he can get some more reps and prove himself. I did want to bring up Pat Riley, who the O's acquired this season at the trade deadline. It was a minor league trade where the O's sent the Pirates Billy Cook and then acquired Pat Riley from the Pirates farm system. Kind of cool. Teammates with Enrique Bradfield Jr. at Vanderbilt. 3.62 ERA in 27 and 1/3 innings pitched for Bowie. You were surprised, baseball aside, by how well of an interview he was.
Very good interview.
But he's going to be a really exciting arm to see next season, and has already been doing really well with Bowie.
Yeah, and nice to see in the farm system as well in the Orioles top 30. You've got a few guys there that were prospects that you traded for. Mentioned Pat Riley, who's the Orioles' 14th ranked prospect. He got him for Billy Cook. Judd Fabian was a member of that 2022 class. He's the Orioles' 11th ranked prospect. He got him in that trade with the Marlins, so you got the pick back for Judd Fabian. And then Juan Nunez, who's the Orioles' 8th ranked prospect. As mentioned, he's a solid pitching prospect in Aberdeen. You got him back in that Jorge Lopez trade for Cade Povich, along with Cade Povich and Yennier Cano, which is just an unbelievable trade for the Orioles at this point, where you get an all-star reliever in Yennier Cano and 2 top 10 pitching prospects in Juan Nunez and Cade Povich. So that is just the gift that keeps on giving. And for as much great work as Mike Elias has done in this farm system, the biggest takeaway for me looking at the top 30 is the job that Kobe Perez and company have done. Go back to 2019 and take a look at how many international prospects were in this Orioles top 30. That's just 5 years ago when Mike Elias brought in guys like Kobe Perez and first took over in this role. There were 0 international prospects that the Orioles had signed in their top 30 according to MLB Pipeline. Now you have Samuel Basallo, who is a top 10 prospect in all of baseball. And then you have, this is going to be a long list, Luis De Leon at 9, Steven Martinez at 10, Thomas Sosa at 15, Braylon Tavera at 16, Joshua Lorenzo at 20, Leandro Arias at 21, Emilio Sanchez at 24, Esteban Mejia at 26, Keeler Morphe at 27, Jordan Sanchez at 28, Aaron Estrada at 29. If you're keeping track at home, that is 12 international signings in the Orioles' top 30 prospects. And they did not have a single one 5 years ago. And I know that we aren't really seeing the fruits of that yet. We're seeing it with Samuel Basayo, who is up in AAA Norfolk, having an unbelievable season. But you're going to see it eventually. I don't know if all of these guys are going to pan out. Obviously, not every prospect in the top 30 is going to turn into a big league contributor. But the Orioles are factors on the international market, and they just flat out were not years ago. And this is how baseball teams are constructed, especially if the Orioles aren't going to have top 10 picks in the MLB draft every year. Like, you can go out and you can find talent on the international market. There are really good teams around baseball that have been built around the international market. I mean, look at the Atlanta Braves, like Ronald Acuna Jr., Ozzie Albies. I know they got him not the correct ways, but point being, they went out on the international market and they spent on guys and they were there active scouting. And the Orioles just flat out were not for a lot of years. And it set this team behind in ways that I don't think we truly realized, because there just weren't international signings that were making any sort of impact at the big league level. So not only do you have the potential for these guys to turn into solid Orioles players, but you're also signing guys that could be trade chips down the line. Yeah. It really, really strengthens your farm system. And again, there's 12 guys in this top 30. I don't know where they are, if they have the same philosophy from 5 years ago where they're just not signing anybody on the international market. So just wanted to highlight that because that's huge.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this would be an extremely 100% different team than as it is now, but especially a few years down the road once these prospects eventually start becoming big league players, if they all make it and whatnot. But Basayo is definitely the tombstone of that important shift that the Orioles made to going out to getting international players. I mean, we could likely see him in the big leagues next season. He definitely has to get around kind of Adley Rutschman, James McCann at catchers, but who have been solidified, but he's obviously getting reps at first base, kind of making sure that he stands out as a versatile defensive player, so that the Orioles have more options to bring him into. And same with Tavian Josenberger. He has that defensive versatility, which I think is huge for both of them. Basayo definitely witnessing that jump from AA to AAA. He's only batting 188 at Norfolk, but he did just have a home run that went 455 feet with 109.7 mile per hour exit velocity.
Yeah.
This guy, for only being 20 years old, is insane.
Yeah, he just turned 20 as well. He got up to AAA Norfolk at age 19, which, if you remember, that is what Jackson Holliday did at the tail end of 2023. He played 18 games for the Norfolk Tides at the end of the 2023 season in his age 19 season. Obviously, for Holliday, it was a quicker process because he starts 2023 in Delmarva, then goes to Aberdeen, and then goes to Bowie, and then goes to Norfolk. For Samuel Basayo, it hasn't been that same just meteoric season, but that's just because he had already done the meteoric rise in 2023, going from Delmarva to Aberdeen to ending the season with 4 games in AA Bowie. And then this year it was, he looked awesome in 100 games in Bowie. And yeah, sure, he's hitting 211 games in AAA Norfolk, but A, he's 19, and B, as you mentioned, we've already seen the power. So if Samuel Basayo comes out at the beginning of next season and lights the world on fire in AAA Norfolk, which I wouldn't be shocked if he does, we could see Samuel Basayo as a 20-year-old big leaguer because he has the power to be here. Like, he has the power to be a big leaguer right now, if everything else was going perfectly. So Samuel Basayo, I would not be surprised at all to see him as even a mid-season call-up next year.
And last thing I'll add is it's cool when you think about Basayo because this is a player that the Orioles, like you said, acquired through international leagues and ways. But when you have Jackson Holliday, who is kind of the same path in the farm system where he moved up really quickly, but he had a ton of hype around him. He was a known player, obviously with his father, Matt Holliday, and still the power that he did have as a minor league player and now into the big leagues. Basayo, you don't find him unless you do what the Orioles did to acquire him. So I think that that's a really cool way to look at it. 2 completely different ways of finding these prospects, but the Orioles still being able to build them up the way they are.
Yeah, and the Orioles went out and signed Basayo. He wasn't even the highest.
Yeah.
He didn't get the highest signing bonus in that international class for the Orioles. That was Michael Hernandez that year. And the Orioles hadn't even built their new Dominican academy. Like, they didn't really have all of the things surrounding their uptick in the international market that they have now. So, I don't think Samuel Basayo is going to be the last top prospect that we see from this international market. I don't know if the Orioles are going to have, a top 10 prospect again next season if Basayo graduates and Mayo graduates, but it's a testament to how quickly this has grown, and it's something worthy of paying attention to in the coming seasons, because this thing is just kind of starting up, and we haven't seen talents like Basayo and other guys that the Orioles have signed on the international market at the big league level yet, but it's going to happen eventually. And when it happens, and when they continue to fill out this top 30, you are going to see why it's so important that the Orioles are finally getting back in to this international market. But the Orioles minor league teams are wrapping up their seasons here in the coming weeks. As mentioned, Delmarva and Aberdeen are both done for the season. Bowie's got one more series. Norfolk has two more series. So overall, a solid minor league season here for the O's. It's not the same level of focus and level of excitement that we usually have about the Orioles farm system. But again, that's a good thing, because guys like Jackson Holliday and Kobe Mayo, and of course in years past, Jordan Westberg, Gunnar Henderson, Grayson Rodriguez, Adley Rutschman, they're here. Mm-hmm. And that was the whole point of the farm system. And, I wouldn't be surprised if there are more guys that get dealt in the offseason away from this Orioles top 30, but the focus is making the big league team better, and that's what they've been doing. But I think that'll just about wrap things up for this week's edition of The Bird's Nest. Thank you so much for following along with us live on YouTube and Facebook. We are live every Wednesday at 11 a.m., or you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts or your digital shows. You can find us here on The Bird's Nest. Wouldn't blame you if you just went with the audio-only version so that you didn't have to see this really scary bobblehead that we have in the middle of our studio here. Big thank you to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one. For Andy Claff, I am Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.